This is Unit 2, Lesson 3. This is the portion of the lesson on the isosceles triangle. So remember, an isosceles triangle is a triangle with at least two congruent legs and two congruent angles. The congruent angles are opposite the congruent legs and vice versa. The congruent legs are opposite the congruent angles. So if we know these two angles are the same, then we know these two legs are the same measure. If these two legs have the same measure, we know these two angles are the same, and the triangle can be classified as isosceles. The base angles are called, the congruent angles are called the base angles. The base is the non-congruent side of the isosceles triangle, unless it is an equilateral triangle. And again, we've gone over all this information above in the vocabulary video. So again, let's move on to applying this knowledge. So in this example 4, given the triangle, the diagram, find the measure of x in degrees, justify your answer. So notice they only gave us one angle in this triangle, which is 44 degrees. That is going to be our vertex angle. And the reason we know that that's called the vertex angle is they gave us these angles down here. This tells us that this is an isosceles triangle, which means that this side and this side will be congruent. But we're not talking about sides here, we're talking about angle measures. So we know all the angles in a triangle sum to 180, and I can represent these two angles with the same variable. I'll call it y because we already have an angle x. So 2 angle y's plus 44 degrees equals 180 degrees. So 180 minus 44 is 136. So 2 times angle y equals 136, and angle y then measures 68 degrees. They didn't want angle y though. They want angle x. We know that angle x and angle y are a linear pair, or supplementary. So we can solve for angle x in this manner. 68 degrees plus angle x equals 180 degrees. 180 minus 68 is 112. So angle x is 112 degrees. So we use the information given that these two base angles were congruent to tell that this was an isosceles triangle. We then found those base angles and used that they are a linear pair or supplementary with x. Angle y and angle x are a linear pair to find angle x. Right, example 5, given the triangle provided on the right, find the measure of angle x and angle y in degrees. So they gave us that these two sides or two legs were 4 and 4, so we know that these are congruent to one another. And so this, again, is an isosceles triangle. What that tells us is the angles opposite those congruent sides are congruent. So angle x equals 66 degrees, because this is isosceles and these are the base angles. Alright, y is now my vertex angle. Again, just reinforcing vocabulary here. So we know that 66 degrees plus 66 degrees plus angle y will give us 180 because these are the interior angles of a triangle. So that gives us 132 plus angle y equals 180 degrees. So the measure of angle y is 48 degrees. Okay, so again, using our knowledge of what an isosceles triangle is, it is helping us to find the unknown angles. So our last example that specifically focuses on the isosceles triangle, given the diagram, find the measures of angles x, y, and z in degrees. Explain how you were able to find each angle measure. So let's start with triangle QRS up top. We have the indication or the annotation on the diagram that these two sides are congruent, meaning that the angles opposite those two sides are congruent. So we know angle x equals angle z. And so I can rename angle z angle x if I want. I just know that they're the same. So 2 times whatever angle x is plus 60 equals 180 degrees. So 2 times angle x equals 120 degrees. So angle x equals 60 degrees. And so does angle z. So these are 60 and 60. And if we were going to explain, we can say that triangle QRS is an isosceles triangle, and the base angles are congruent. Actually, QRS is an equilateral, but that's not what we use to find it, but you could say that as well. So now we're going to focus on angle Y, which is the vertex angle. This again is another isosceles triangle, but notice this has one dash mark and one dash mark. So QRST is not a square because all the sides aren't congruent. This only has one dash, the other two sides up there have two. So we know that 2 times angle 50 plus angle Y equals 180. So that's 100 plus angle Y equals 180. So angle Y equals 80 degrees. So triangle QST is isosceles, and angle Y is the vertex angle. All angles in a triangle sum to 180. And that's what we use. That's our explanation.